Hello, this is Professor BRB, and in this video we'll show how to quickly transform the heart that we created in our last video into a chrysanthemum flower, either one of these two. So let's get started. Just move this out of the way and get rid of these so we can recreate them. First, I'd like you to make sure that you're showing your grid. If it's not already showing, you can do that in the View menu. And also turn on Smart Guides. Take your heart from the last tutorial and you can center that on a grid line so that you can see what's going on here. And that gives us a great way to find the center. Now I want a narrower petal than this heart, but it's very easy to transform it. I've got the heart selected with the selection tool, the black arrow. I go to the bounding box here, and if I just push the bounding box, it's going to squeeze it this way. But I want it to squeeze from the center, so I hold down my Option key, or your Alt key if you're on a PC. And I can just choose the width of my flower, and yours doesn't have to be exactly like mine. In order to rotate and duplicate it, we use the Rotate tool. As I select the Rotate tool, you can see this little crosshair that appears in the center of the petal. The Rotate tool by default chooses a rotation point in the center of any selected object. And right now this would just rotate this around its own center, which is not what I want. So I'm going to Command Z that. And I'm going to set a rotation point down below the point. And this is where the grid comes in handy. Let me go down maybe 1, 2, 3 little grid squares. Hold down the Option key and click. That brings up your Rotate dialog box. Now I want to rotate this in some increment that divides evenly into 360 because there are 360 degrees in a circle. So let's do 15 and hit Copy. Very good. So now we can go Object, Transform, Transform again. And you'll notice that there is a keyboard command for this, Command D. That little clover leaf means the Command key. So let's do that. And so now I can just hold on my Command key and hit D. D, 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 D. All the way around. And bingo, there is my flower. So now I'd like to add that yellow center. So I'm going to click off with my selection tool to deselect. And here I'm going to go into draw behind mode because right now if I draw a circle, it's going to draw on top of this. And that's not what I want. So down here in your toolbox, you can switch temporarily to draw behind mode and get your ellipse tool. Since we have our center here, and the Smart Guides are helping us out as well, I can hold down my Option and my Shift key and draw a perfect circle out from the center. Let's change the color of this to yellow. Now if I want to see a little bit more of the overlapping and include a little more complexity visually here, if I go to my transparency panel, which you can find under Window, and you can see that if I reduce the opacity, I can see a little more detail. I'm going to hide my grid right now because I don't want to look at it anymore. So this is kind of interesting, isn't it? I can now see some of the overlapping. And if you want, this is kind of a good opportunity to experiment with blending modes. And those of you who know Photoshop are very familiar with them. A lot of people don't realize you've still got them in Illustrator. So you can try different blending modes and see how that makes the colors interact. In some cases, it won't change much, and in other cases, it will. So this is kind of a fun way to learn blending modes because you can just experiment with them. And I thought difference was sort of interesting in this, creating that dark center. So anyway, our next tutorial, we'll draw another flower and go further into the marvelous rotate tool. So I hope you'll join us for that.